Our mom revealed a secret family after dinner, but the truth was even worse. Reddit stories. You wouldn't think one meal could destroy everything a family built over generations. But before I take you there, before that night where forks dropped mid-air and silence roared louder than thunder, you need to understand the layers. The invisible scaffolding that held us up, even when we didn't realize it was cracking. My family wasn't perfect, but to anyone peeking through the windows of our lives, we seemed unbreakable. My father was a stoic man, the type who didn't speak unless words were necessary, but when he did, you listened. My mother, the kind of woman who wore grief behind her smile but never let it dim the lights in our home. They met when they were young, stayed through the storms, and built a house not just of bricks but of loyalty, sacrifice, and quiet secrets. I was the middle child of three. We were like chords in a song, sometimes dissonant, sometimes in harmony, but always connected. My older sister had the gravity of a firstborn, always responsible, always composed. My younger brother was the chaos, the laughter, the wild unpredictability none of us knew how to tame but didn't really want to. Our lives orbited the Sunday dinners, no matter what fractured our weekdays. Failing grades, heartbreak, or tension that crackled between walls. Sundays were sacred. We sat, we passed dishes, we made eye contact even when we didn't want to. It was the one rule no one dared break, even if we were breaking inside. I think it all began unraveling years ago, so slowly that none of us noticed. My father started sitting at the head of the table, but stopped leading the conversations. He became a statue, present only in flesh. My mother started overcompensating, piling food higher, laughing louder, trying harder, as if she could cover a widening void with mashed potatoes and gravy. My sister's silences got longer. My brother's jokes got sharper. And me? I started recording things in my mind. Every glance, every pause, every flicker of a hidden expression. I became the family historian, not in photographs or scrapbooks, but in memories that no one else wanted to carry. One memory in particular stayed with me, the look my mother gave my father one night when he came home late. Not anger, not suspicion, something heavier. Like she knew something that she had been pretending not to know for years. I remember watching her clutch the back of a kitchen chair as if it was the only thing anchoring her to earth. She didn't say a word, and neither did he. That silence wasn't empty. It was crowded with everything they never said. Still, we carried on. Birthdays came and went, graduations framed and forgotten, relationships started and crashed. My sister got engaged, then unengaged. My brother moved out, then moved back in. And I kept coming back to the table every Sunday, because I needed the illusion of normal as much as anyone else. I noticed the cracks widening. My father forgetting little things. Dates, names, stories he used to repeat with surgical precision. My mother flinching when someone knocked on the door too hard. My sister clenching her jaw when someone mentioned children. But no one talked. That was our real family trait. We never asked questions whose answers might shake the foundation. Until that one Sunday, the day everything pretended couldn't happen happened. It was a normal day by all appearances. The roast was in the oven. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the house. My sister had brought a bottle of wine. My brother had brought a girl he'd been seeing, too briefly to remember her name now. And I had brought dessert, like always. My father was already at the table, sitting like a king on a slowly sinking throne. My mother was plating the roast, humming an old song that I realized none of us knew the words to. We were smiling, but our teeth didn't match our eyes. That was the thing. I think we all sensed it. Like the air before a tornado, heavy and still. We all felt the weight of something unsaid. And then it came, not in a shout or a scream, but in the softest voice at the most unexpected moment. My mother set the plate down in front of my father and said, "I think it's time we told them." Just like that. No fanfare, no drama. My sister froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. My brother choked on his wine. I looked at my mother like she had just grown wings or horns. I didn't know which. My father blinked, slowly, like someone waking up from a long, pleasant dream into a nightmare. And I didn't know the specifics, but I knew the shape of it. I had always known something was being kept from us, like a locked drawer or a coded letter no one could read. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother, ever the gracious one, didn't force it. She just turned to us and said, "Before any of you were born, your father had another family?" But there was a stillness that settled on the table so complete, I could hear the refrigerator hum in the next room. I couldn't move. Not out of shock, but because some part of me had always suspected. My father had that look, like he was always missing someone, like he was only ever half present, like he never fully unpacked from a past he refused to name. My sister, bless her, whispered, "What?" like it would soften the blow. My brother started laughing, not from humor, but because he didn't know what else to do with his face. My mother kept going, her voice steady and terrifying in its calm. It was before we met, but they existed. He had a wife, 2 daughters. He never told you because, well, he thought it wouldn't matter, that it was over. But my father finally spoke. I didn't think I'd ever see them again, and I didn't. But recently one of them found me. That was when I realized why he had been so quiet lately. Not just old age, not just distance, guilt, and maybe even a kind of relief now that the truth had bled out onto the table. We all sat in stunned silence. The roast went cold. The girl my brother brought made an excuse and left. The wine dried on our lips. It was like being handed a family portrait and realizing half the faces had been cut out. My sister stood up, walked out. My brother stared at his plate like it might offer an answer. I looked at my father, this man I thought I knew, and saw a stranger who had been pretending to be someone for so long he started believing it himself. That night I went home and started writing everything down. Every glance, every word, every piece of this new puzzle that changed the picture forever. Because I knew this was just the beginning. My father's past hadn't just caught up with him. It had arrived, knocked on the door, and sat down at the dinner table. And none of us would ever look at each other the same way again. But that wasn't the end. No, what none of us knew then was that the real twist hadn't happened yet. Because hidden behind my father's confession was a truth so explosive, so buried. It made his secret family look like a footnote. A truth that would come to light not through a letter or a phone call, but through something far more ordinary. Something as innocent as a child's drawing left behind in a backpack. I couldn't sleep that night. The walls of my bedroom, usually a cocoon of silence and comfort, felt like they were pressing inward, listening, judging. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that the foundation of my life had just been uprooted. I kept replaying my mother's words. Your father had another family. And the way she said it, with no drama, no anger, just a resignation that made it all so much worse. I thought about my father's face, hollowed out by secrets, and how I used to mistake that hollowness for wisdom. And then I thought about the unnamed daughter who had found him. One of them. What did she want? Why now? Had she written a letter? Made a phone call? Or worse, had she come in person, walked through the same door we did every Sunday, touched the same doorknob, breathed the same air? I had so many questions, but none I dared ask. The next morning, the world had the audacity to go on. Emails still arrived. The sun still rose. My boss still sent me a passive, aggressive message about a report being late. But my mind was stuck in that dining room, in that moment when the curtain was ripped down and we all saw the machinery of our family for what it really was. That evening, I visited my mother. I needed clarity. Something beyond the explosion. She was folding laundry in the living room, a mundane act that made me irrationally angry. How could she do laundry like nothing had happened? I watched her for a moment before sitting down and asking, did you know? She didn't even pretend to misunderstand. I always had a feeling. Your father's past was blank in a way no real past is. She paused. But I found out definitively about a month ago. A letter came. No return address, just a name. Elaine. That was the name of his first wife, Elaine. A name with no face, no history, but suddenly a character in the story of my life. My mother continued, I confronted him. He admitted it, and I told him he needed to tell you. To tell all of you. He didn't want to. Said it would ruin everything. I told him it already had. I nodded, not out of agreement but out of necessity. If I didn't nod, I might start screaming. Do you know anything else? I asked. Just that one of the daughters, her name's Ava, found him. She didn't ask for anything, just wanted to know who he was. She said she'd known all her life that something was missing. That sentence stuck in me like a splinter, because I had felt that too. Maybe we all had. Maybe that's what connected us, even across the chasm of betrayal and time. I left with 1,000 new thoughts chewing through my brain. I didn't tell my brother or sister about my visit. I wasn't sure what they were feeling, and I didn't want to speak their pain aloud before they were ready. But as it turns out, the truth wasn't done with us yet. A few days later, I got a call from my sister. Her voice was clipped, metallic, the way it always got when she was holding back tears. You need to come to Mom and Dad's. Now. When I arrived, she was standing in the hallway with an envelope in her hand, white and trembling like a leaf. My brother was already there, pacing the living room like a caged animal. He didn't say anything when I came in, just pointed at the envelope. My sister said, "It's from Ava." I froze. I hadn't even asked how she got our address. Maybe my father gave it to her. Maybe she already knew more about us than we did about her. My sister unfolded the letter and began reading it aloud. It was handwritten, careful cursive, neat but heavy. Each word felt intentional. To the family I never knew, I'm not writing to hurt you. I debated for months about whether I should say anything at all, but I couldn't live with the questions anymore. My mother told me about your father when I was 16. She said he wasn't a bad man, just a scared one. He left before I was born. I don't know why. She never blamed him. But she did leave behind something that might explain everything. There was a pause in the room so loud it hurt. My sister continued before she died. My mother gave me a box of letters, not from him, but about him. Letters written to someone named Margaret. I didn't know who that was, but they were signed with your father's name and dated after he'd already married your mother. I think he was still in contact with this Margaret long after he left us. I don't know if it means anything now. I just thought you deserved to know. We were all stunned, not because of what the letter said. We were long past the point of shock, but because of what it suggested. There wasn't just one secret. There was another. Someone named Margaret, another chapter, another scar. My brother was the first to break. Who the hell is Margaret? He snapped. My sister looked at me like I had an answer, but I didn't. I had less than nothing. All I had was a name and a growing suspicion that the man we called was more fiction than fact. The next step was obvious. We had to ask him. But how do you confront a man who just revealed he lived a double life with the surgical coldness of a banker reading a statement? We waited until the following Sunday, as if keeping the ritual would somehow protect us. We didn't eat. The table was bare. My father sat down, saw the envelope, and knew. He didn't ask what it was. He just said, "So you know about Margaret?" There it was again, that eerie calm, like confession was just another chore. Who was she? My sister demanded. She was my sister, he said. Half-sister, actually. My father had her with another woman before marrying my mother. She died when I was 20. But before that, she was the only person I could talk to. About everything. About Elaine. About the girls. About how I felt trapped in my own skin. She was the only one who didn't judge me. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. So many secrets, nested inside each other like Russian dolls. Did Mom know about her? I asked. No, he said. I kept Margaret separate. She was the only piece of my past I didn't want to bury. That's when something inside me snapped. You buried everything else, your first wife, your daughters, us. My father looked down, ashamed or maybe just tired. You don't understand, he said. You think love is clean, that it follows rules. It doesn't. I didn't stop loving your mother. I didn't stop loving any of you. I just couldn't fit everything into one life. It was the worst thing he could have said, because it was too human, too reasonable, and that made it unforgivable. My sister left. My brother punched the wall. I just sat there, staring at the man I thought I knew, and realizing he wasn't a villain. He was a coward, and that was harder to hate. That night, I went home and pulled out an old box I hadn't touched in years, childhood drawings. Photos, cards. One of them caught my eye, a drawing I did when I was 5. A house, 2 adults, 2 kids. But there was something odd, a third figure, off to the side. No face, just a body. A name scrawled beside it, Ava. I stared at it for a long time, chills crawling up my spine. I had no memory of drawing that, no memory of knowing that name. But there it was in my handwriting, years before my father ever said it aloud. That was when I realized the truth hadn't just arrived with Ava's letter. It had been bleeding into our lives all along, like a quiet leak beneath the floorboards. And now, finally, the house was beginning to sink. I didn't sleep that night either. It had become a theme since the confession. My nights were no longer measured in hours, but in questions. I kept staring at that drawing, the little figure labeled Ava. The name written in a wobbly, childish scrawl that I had no memory of ever learning. And yet there it was, etched into the paper like some ghostly prophecy. How did I know her name back then? How could I have possibly known about a half-sister I'd never met, never even heard of until days ago? The only explanation was that something had slipped through. An overheard conversation, a forgotten moment, maybe even a whispered name while I was half asleep. Children absorb things like ink into paper. We listen when adults think we're too young to understand, and somehow, somewhere, the name had found me. That morning, I didn't go to work. I took the drawing with me and drove to the old family house. My grandparents' place, long since empty, its windows dusted with the past. Something about that house had always felt different, heavier, like it remembered too much. I hadn't been there in years, but I still had the key. As I walked through the creaking front door, the smell of mothballs and old wood hit me like a memory grenade. The wallpaper was peeling. The air was thick, but it was quiet. Quiet in the way you need when you're searching for answers no one wants to say out loud. I walked through each room, touching surfaces as if they might talk back. Then I went up to the attic. I hadn't been up there since I was a teenager, but something tugged at me, some pull I couldn't explain. The attic was cluttered with boxes, suitcases, and the skeletal remains of furniture too broken to keep but too sentimental to throw away. I started digging through a chest I remembered my grandmother being protective over. Inside were old letters, photos, envelopes so yellowed they looked like dried leaves. And then I found it, tucked between a tax return and a recipe card, an envelope marked Margaret. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single photograph, 2 teenagers smiling awkwardly. One of them was unmistakably my father. The other, a girl with his nose and the same squint to her eyes. Margaret. On the back was scribbled "Summer dated 63, before everything fell apart." I turned the photo over again, trying to read the silence between them. What did everything mean? What fell apart? My father had never spoken of a sister. My grandparents never mentioned another child. But this photo wasn't a lie. It was proof of a relationship buried so deep even time forgot to rot it. As I drove back, the questions only multiplied. Who was Margaret really? Why was she kept a secret? And how did Ava know about her if we didn't? That evening, I sat in front of my laptop and searched. I didn't expect much. Margaret is a common name. But I had a last name now, Prescott. My grandmother's maiden name. I cross-referenced it with local obituaries and public records. And then I found it, Margaret Prescott, deceased 1981. No spouse listed, no children. But the obituary was odd. It didn't say, beloved daughter or loving sister. It simply read, survived by close friend Elaine Morris and her daughters Ava and Elise. My heart stopped. Elaine, Ava, Elise. Margaret wasn't just my father's sister. She had been living with his former wife. I stared at the screen, each word rearranging the past in violent new shapes. My mind spun. What were the chances? Was it a coincidence? No, it couldn't be. There was only one explanation. Margaret hadn't just been a sister to my father. She had been a bridge between two lives, a quiet connector. But why? Why had she gone to live with Elaine? Why hadn't she told anyone? I picked up the phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Hello. I found something," I said. "About Margaret. She lived with Elaine before she died. She knew Eva. She knew everything." There was a pause. Then, I didn't know that. She was in their lives. She was there. Why would she do that? I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she was trying to make amends. Maybe she wanted to stay close to your father without actually being part of his mess. But she didn't tell him. Or us. Maybe she did tell him, my mother said quietly. And maybe he just never told you. That hit harder than I expected. Of course he might have known. He might have known everything. My father had become an expert in omission. He built our lives on carefully selected truths and strategically placed lies. He wasn't malicious. He was methodical. And that made it worse. I didn't speak to him for days. I didn't speak to anyone. I needed time to absorb it, to understand the shape of the shadow Eva had been living in. And the shadow I hadn't realized I'd been living in, too. Because what scared me most wasn't the lie. It was the reflection. I began to see pieces of myself in the story. The compartmentalizing, the pretending, the silent suffering. Maybe it wasn't just inherited, it was contagious. Then came the message, an email, no subject line. Just one sentence, "I think we should meet." Eva attached was a location, a coffee shop in a nearby town. Neutral ground. I stared at it for hours before replying, "Tomorrow, noon." The next day, I arrived early. The place was nearly empty. Soft jazz played over the speakers. I ordered coffee and sat near the window. My leg wouldn't stop bouncing. Then, 10 minutes later, she walked in. Eva. She looked like someone I might have passed on the street 100 times. Tall, dark hair, serious eyes. She scanned the room and saw me, then came over and sat across from me without a word. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You look like him." "So do you." She smiled, a sad, almost grateful kind of smile. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded. I had to. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she said. "I just needed to see. To know what was on the other side of the wall." I understood that feeling more than I could express. "How much do you know?" I asked. "Not everything," she said. "Only what my mother told me." She never spoke badly of him. She just said he couldn't handle two lives. That Margaret helped, took care of us when he couldn't. So Margaret was like a second mother. She was more like a secret aunt, Eva said. She was always there, but we weren't allowed to talk about her outside the house. I think she was ashamed. Or afraid. I don't know. I nodded again, trying to digest it. "She left us a long time ago," I said. "She never left us," Eva whispered. "She was the glue." Then she reached into her bag and handed me something. An envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Her journal." "Margaret's, I thought you should read it." I took the envelope and felt its weight. Heavy, like truth. As Eva stood to leave, she said, "We're not enemies. Just people with overlapping stories." She left without another word. I drove home in silence, the envelope burning in my hands. When I finally opened it, the first page said some stories are told out loud. Others are hidden in silence. But all of them matter. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have possibly known, was that this journal wouldn't just reveal more secrets. It would rewrite the definition of family in a way none of us were ready for. Because buried in those pages was a truth even my father didn't know. A truth that would change everything. Again, I didn't open the journal right away. It sat on my desk like a ticking bomb, silent but charged. Every time I reached for it, something in me recoiled. Not out of fear, but reverence, because I knew once I turned those pages, I'd never see my family the same way again. This wasn't just a diary. It was a confession from a woman who had become a ghost in our family's story. Margaret, the hidden aunt, the keeper of my father's real self, the invisible thread running through every fracture we thought we understood. What would her words say about the man who raised me? What would they say about me? When I finally opened it, it was dusk. The house was quiet except for the whir of the fridge and the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. I flipped past the first few blank pages until the words began, handwritten in small, delicate script, June 3, 1979. I've decided to start writing because I'm tired of carrying silence like it's a virtue. Silence is poison when it protects the wrong people. And I've spent my life protecting my brother. Already the journal had its claws in me. I kept reading. He came to me after leaving Elaine, broken, confused, pretending it was temporary. He said he needed time to think, to figure out who he was. But what he really needed was someone to lie to both sides for him. Someone to tell Elaine he was working things out. Someone to tell our parents he was doing the right thing. And someone to tell his new wife nothing at all. That person was me. I stopped there. My hands were shaking. This wasn't the story we were told. We believed he had left Elaine before he met our mother. We believed the timelines didn't overlap. But according to Margaret, they did. He hadn't walked away clean. He had blurred the lines, and Margaret had been his accomplice. I kept reading. I didn't want to help him. I told him it was wrong, but he looked at me with that same pleading look he had when we were kids, when he got into trouble and needed me to take the blame. I used to think protecting him was loyalty. Now I wonder if it was cowardice. Each entry peeled back a layer of my father I hadn't known existed. There were moments of warmth, yes. Him sending small gifts to Elaine anonymously. Him asking about the girls from a distance. But also moments of complete detachment. He stopped writing. He stopped calling. Margaret became the only connection they had to him. She visited, brought groceries, listened to Ava and Elise talk about the father they thought was dead. Then came the entry that changed everything. October 14, 1980. I got the results today. Ava isn't his daughter. I froze. The words didn't register at first. I had to reread them twice, 3 times. Ava isn't his daughter. The sentence cracked open a reality I hadn't even imagined. Elaine never told him. She told me. She said it didn't matter anymore, that he had already abandoned them. But she thought I should know. Ava was the result of something that happened after he left, someone she met briefly, a man who didn't stay. She never wanted Ava to feel different, so she raised both girls as his, but the truth is, only Elise is his child. Ava was never his, and yet she's the one trying to find him now. I closed the journal and sat back, stunned. Ava, the girl who had been seeking her father, writing us letters, asking for a connection, wasn't biologically related to him at all. She had been searching for someone who wasn't hers to claim. And the one person who could have told her, who should have told her, was gone. Margaret had taken that secret to her grave, and now it was mine. I didn't know what to do with it. Should I tell my family? Should I tell Ava? Would it matter? Or would it just destroy the fragile bridge we had barely begun to build? I spent the next few days trying to act normal. I went to work, responded to texts, smiled at neighbors, but everything felt like pretending. My sister noticed first. She came over one evening, unannounced, and said, "You know something. I can see it." I tried to deny it, but she stared at me until I caved. I told her everything, the journal, the entries, the truth about Ava. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Do you realize what this means? Dad lied about everything. Not just the family. Not just Margaret. He let us believe that Ava was his daughter. And maybe he believed it too. But the one person who could have cleared it up never did." I said, "Maybe she thought it was kinder that way." My sister shook her head. "There's nothing kind about a lie that big." We agreed not to tell our brother yet. He was still reeling from the last bombshell, but the truth had to come out eventually. And it did, just not the way we planned. A week later, Ava called. She was crying. Her voice cracked as she said, "I got a letter, but..." "What kind of letter?" I asked, already knowing. "From a lawyer. It's about Margaret's estate. Apparently, she left something for me, something unexpected." I didn't say anything. Ava continued, "It's a DNA report. It confirms what I think you already know." There was silence. Then she said, "You knew, didn't you?" "I found out a few days ago," I admitted. "I didn't know how to tell you." She let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. "It's funny. I spent my whole life wondering why I never felt like I belonged. Turns I was right. I don't." "That's not true," I said. "Blood isn't everything." It was to me, and then she hung up. I didn't hear from her again for a while. Weeks passed. Then one day I got another letter. This one was different. It wasn't from Ava, it was from Alice. I wanted to say thank you, it read, "for being kind to Ava. She's not okay right now, but she will be. I've always known she was different, but I never loved her any less. Neither did Mom. And I don't think your father did either, even if he didn't know the whole truth." Then came the sentence that floored me. "But there's one more thing you should know. Margaret wasn't just a bridge. She wasn't just helping from the sidelines. She raised us. She lived with us for years. She was more of a parent than anyone else. And before she died, she told me that she loved your family like it was her own. She said, 'One day, they'll come looking. When they do, tell them I forgave them a long time ago.'" I read it over and over again. Margaret, the woman our father had hidden, had loved us anyway. Even though we never knew her, even though we never reached out. She forgave us before we even knew we needed forgiveness. That night, I returned to the journal. I read every page, every word. I cried. I laughed. I mourned a woman I never met but somehow felt close to. And when I closed the final page, I realized something. Our family had never been simple. It had been stitched together by choices, by lies, by love, by guilt. Ava may not have been our blood, but she was our story. And Margaret was the glue that held it all together, quietly, in the background, with no credit and no bitterness. But there was still one secret buried deeper, a final journal entry that I hadn't noticed before. Written on the last page, tucked into the spine, almost hidden. Final thought, if they ever read this, tell them. There's a reason Ava always looked like me. And not like Elaine, or anyone else. Some truths are too dangerous to write down, but they'll know what I mean. One day, I stared at that line stunned. Was Margaret saying, "No, it couldn't be"? Unless Ava wasn't Elaine's daughter. Unless Ava was Margaret's. It took me a full hour to process that final sentence. I kept tracing Margaret's words over and over. "There's a reason Ava always looked like me." It rang in my head like a riddle wrapped in a confession. I sat there in the dim light of my living room, the journal open on my lap. Heart pounding with something heavier than fear. Revelation. If what Margaret hinted was true, then everything we'd believed about Ava's origin, about her connection to our family, had been a smokescreen for something even more complex. Margaret hadn't just been a protector, a witness, a silent observer of our family's collapse. She had been a mother. Ava's mother. And suddenly, like puzzle pieces snapping into place, things began to make terrifying, beautiful sense. Why Margaret had moved in with Elaine. Why she'd been present during Ava's childhood but always in the margins. Why she left a DNA report for Ava, but never told her the full truth. And most damning of all, why Ava didn't look like Elaine or Liz, but did resemble someone else in their family tree. Her. The more I thought about it, the more my memories began betraying themselves. There were flashes I hadn't paid attention to at the time. Photos Ava had shown me briefly when we met at the coffee shop. I remembered one in particular, Ava around age 6, sitting on a couch, a woman's hand resting lightly on her shoulder, cropped out just at the wrist. Ava had said, "That's Margaret's hand." She always hated having her picture taken. I had brushed past it then. Now I couldn't unsee it. The tenderness, the positioning, subtle clues I'd missed. Not the hand of a house guest. The hand of a mother. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. That night, I called my sister and brother and told them to come to my apartment. When they arrived, I showed them the journal. I pointed to the final entry. Neither spoke for a long time. My brother just stared at the page like he'd will it to disappear. My sister read it twice, then 3 times, her face unreadable. "She's not Elaine's," my brother asked, voice hoarse. "Boot, she said her mother was." "She believed that?" I interrupted. "Or maybe she didn't. Maybe they told her that to protect her. Margaret lived with them. She raised her. Maybe she gave birth to her." "Bah! That's insane," he muttered. "No," my sister said quietly. "It's not. It's the only thing that explains the way Margaret wrote about her. The way she bled for her, protected her." My brother ran a hand through his hair and paced the room. "So, who's the father then? Dad? Someone else?" The air tightened. That question hung between us like a sword. None of us wanted to ask it, let alone answer it. But we couldn't ignore it. If Ava was Margaret's daughter, that opened up terrifying possibilities. Had our father? "No," I said, almost before the thought could finish forming. Margaret would have said. If that had happened, she wouldn't have danced around it. She would have named it. Unless she couldn't. My sister whispered. "No," I insisted again. That's not who she was. She was precise, honest in her pain. If someone hurt her, she'd have burned them on the page. She didn't. That last line, it wasn't bitter. It was careful. Ava's existence wasn't a wound. It was something she was proud of, quietly. Now my brother exhaled and nodded slowly, reluctantly convinced. "Then who?" "I don't know," I said. "But I think Ava needs too." And that's when I realized what I had to do. I had to tell her, not through another letter, not through some middleman. She deserved to hear it from someone who had read the truth in her mother's own words, someone who didn't just want to drop a truth bomb and walk away. So I called her. She didn't answer the first time, or the second. But on the third try, her voice came through, wary and wary. "It's me," I said. "I need to see you. It's important, it's about the journal." But there was a pause. Then, "Okay, tomorrow, my place." She gave me an address, and I spent the next 18 hours rehearsing what I'd say. But nothing could prepare me for the moment she opened the door. Ava looked thinner, paler. Her eyes were tired but alert. She gestured me in without a word. We sat on her couch in a silence so thick it nearly choked me. "I read the whole journal," I began. "There's something in the final entry. Something she left for you. Not just you, us. All of us." She watched me unmoving. "She said you looked like her, not like Elaine. And she wrote that some truths are too dangerous to put in writing. But she wanted us to know." I let the weight of it settle before continuing. "Ava, I think Margaret was your biological mother." Her eyes didn't widen. They narrowed, focused. Like she'd heard the words before, just in dreams or subconscious mutterings. "I thought about it a lot," she said quietly. "There were signs, the way she touched me, protected me. Once, when I was maybe 10, I got really sick. High fever. Elaine sat with me for a while, but it was Margaret who stayed up all night, wiping my forehead, whispering stories. She held me like she was afraid I'd vanish." I said nothing. What could I say? She stood and walked to a drawer, pulled out an old photograph and handed it to me. It was her as a newborn. Margaret cradling her, smiling. Not at the camera, but at the baby. Elaine was in the background, out of focus. I handed it back, heart pounding. "I always thought it was a fluke," Ava said. "But now I know. She was mine, and I was hers." We sat in silence for a long time. Then she looked at me, tears forming in her eyes. "So, who was my father?" "I don't know," I admitted. She never said. "But I think there's one more place to look." Ava stared. "Margaret's storage unit." She blinked. "How do you know she had one?" "Elise told me. She mentioned once that Margaret had kept some things locked away. Journals, letters, keepsakes. Maybe something's there. We didn't wait. Within an hour, we were at the facility Elise had mentioned. The clerk didn't give us trouble. Ava had legal access through the estate documents Margaret had prepared. The key slid in with a soft click, and the door groaned open like a vault of the past. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, organized meticulously. We dug through them slowly, care photos, clothing, old cassette tapes. Then, a shoebox marked Fico Inf Duntel 1979. Ava opened it with trembling fingers inside a stack of letters. One stood out, addressed to Margaret, from someone named Michael. The first line read, "I'm sorry I had to leave. I never meant for it to happen that way." We read the letter in stunned silence. Michael had met Margaret in 1978. They'd had a brief, intense relationship. He was married. He'd left unexpectedly. But the final lines burned into our minds. "I wish I could meet her, the daughter you say you're carrying. I hope she inherits your kindness, your strength, your fire. Please name her something beautiful, something that reminds you of hope." Ava covered her mouth. Tears spilled over. "He knew," she whispered. "He wanted her." But we found more letters. No return address, just heartfelt messages over 2 years. Then they stopped. Nothing after 1981. "Maybe he died," I offered. "Or disappeared," she said. "Maybe he had no choice." We sat there, two strangers united by a hidden story. No answers written in stone, just possibilities etched in ink and silence. But we had something stronger now than certainty. We had truth. Not the neat, clean truth of family trees and DNA tests. The messy, painful, redemptive truth of who raised us, who protected us, and who chose to love us despite the lies. Ava may not have been my sister by blood. But that night, sitting beside her on that dusty floor, she felt more like family than anyone else I'd ever known. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the final twist hadn't revealed itself yet. Some truths arrive like thunder, sudden, deafening, unmistakable. Others creep in slowly like rising water beneath your floorboards. You don't notice until it's too late. That's what the final truth was like. It didn't roar into my life, it seeped. And by the time I saw it clearly, it had already changed everything. The day after Ava and I read Michael's letters, we drove to a park near the river where Margaret had once taken Ava as a child. It was quiet, empty except for a few scattered joggers and the whisper of wind through the trees. Ava sat on a bench with one of the letters in her lap, her fingers brushing it like it might vanish if she let go. "It's strange," she said. "How much clarity hurts." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I understood. "I thought knowing who I was would fix the etch," she continued. "But now that I know, the H's still here, just wearing a different face." That's the thing about family. Even when the pieces are finally laid out, they don't always fit. Sometimes the puzzle was never meant to form a single picture. Sometimes it was designed to remind you that belonging is not the same as understanding. Still, I wasn't ready to let go of the questions. Not yet, because something about Michael's letters, his words, his tone, lingered in my mind like smoke that wouldn't clear. The way he spoke about Margaret, the intensity, the guilt. I couldn't help but wonder if he had known more, if he had been involved longer, if somehow his story was tied deeper into ours. That night, I went back to the storage unit alone. I dug through more boxes, more folders, and then I found it, a second shoebox. This one not labeled, not even sealed. Inside, dozens of photographs. Most were harmless. Ava as a baby, Elise as a toddler, Margaret holding them both in a garden. But at the very bottom was a picture that stopped my heart. 3 people, Margaret, Ava, and standing between them, a man. Not my father, not anyone I recognized, but Ava did. Because when I showed her the next day, her hand flew to her mouth and she whispered, "That's him. That's Michael. Are you sure? I've seen him before. Once. In our house? I was maybe 7. He came to drop something off for Margaret. I remember because he looked at me like he knew me, like I was his. I turned the photo over, a date. July 1985. 4 years after Michael's last letter, which meant he hadn't disappeared. He'd come back. Why would Margaret say he vanished? I asked. Why wouldn't she tell you he was still around? Ava was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, maybe because she was trying to protect me from something. And that's when we both knew. We had to find him. It wasn't easy. Michael had never used a last name in his letters, but he mentioned once working for a local newspaper in the late 70s. That was our starting point. We combed through old archives, flipped through microfilm at the library, followed vague mentions and half-forgotten bylines. And finally we found him. Michael R. Bennett, journalist, former columnist, retired, now living 2 states away. We didn't hesitate. We got in the car the next morning and drove through miles of forest and farmland until we reached a quiet little town with more antique stores than people. Michael lived in a small white house with an overgrown garden and a chipped mailbox. Ava was silent the entire drive. Her hands trembled as she knocked on the door. When he opened it, time stood still. He was older, slower, hair gone gray and thin, but his eyes were unmistakable. And when they landed on Ava, something flickered. Recognition, shock, maybe even guilt. "Ava," he said, voice cracking. She nodded, tears already forming. "You remember me?" "Of course I do," he whispered. They stood like that for a moment. Then he invited us in. His home was simple, clean, lived in. The walls were lined with books. A single framed photo of Margaret sat on a shelf beside the fireplace. "She was the best person I ever knew," he said as we sat. "And the bravest." We asked questions slowly, carefully. Michael answered each one with precision, almost like he'd rehearsed them. He and Margaret had fallen in love while he was separated from his wife. Their affair had been brief but real. When she told him she was pregnant, he'd offered to help. But her pride got in the way. She refused money, refused contact, told him to move on. "But I couldn't," he said. "I came back," I wrote. "I visited once or twice just to check in. Margaret always kept me at a distance. She said if I stayed, I'd ruin everything." "Why?" Ava asked. Michael looked at her with such gentleness it was unbearable. "Because your existence wasn't just a secret. It was a lie she'd built to protect you from being the child of an affair. She let Elaine raise you because she thought that would give you a better chance. A normal life." Ava started to cry. Michael reached out a shaking hand. She didn't pull away. You were never unwanted," he whispered. "You were just born in the cracks of people's broken choices." We stayed for hours. When we left, Ava hugged him. I watched as she held on longer than necessary, maybe catching up for years of missed embraces. We drove back in silence again. But this time it felt different. Not heavy, just full. The next week, we called a family meeting. My mother, my siblings, Ava and Elise. We sat in the same living room where my father's first confession had cracked everything open. Now, we were here to finish the story. We told them about Margaret, about Michael, about Ava's true parentage. No one interrupted. My mother cried softly, hands folded like she was praying. My sister held Ava's hand. My brother just nodded, not because he understood, but because he finally accepted he never would. When it was over, Ava stood up. "I came here to find a father," she said. "Instead, I found a mother I never truly lost, and a family I didn't know I needed." We all stood with her. In the months that followed, we stayed close. Ava started visiting more often. My mother took to calling her my fourth child. Elise moved nearby. Michael came to Sunday dinners once or twice, always quiet, always watching Ava like he couldn't believe she was real. And my father, he never knew. He died quietly 6 weeks after that final family meeting, in his sleep. We never told him about Margaret's journal, or Ava's true origin. Maybe we should have. Maybe it would have broken something in him, or healed it. I'll never know. At the funeral, Ava stood next to me, silent. After the service, she leaned in and said, "I'm glad I found him, even if he wasn't really mine." I replied, "Maybe he wasn't your father, but he was part of your story. And that matters." She nodded, smiling through tears. That night, I went home and opened Margaret's journal one last time. I reread the final page. Some truths are too dangerous to write down. But some truths, once spoken, become the air we breathe. This story started with a name whispered at the dinner table, a single crack that shattered our illusions. What emerged wasn't destruction, it was a strange, imperfect rebirth. We didn't go back to how things were. We couldn't, but we became something new. A family, not of blood, not of lies, but of survivors, of truth bearers. And in the end, that was enough. Thanks for watching the video, subscribe, and like the video.